afternoon, everyone, and I want to introduce you all to Maggie. Maggie has an extensive working life, specializing in the area of abuse and trauma as a therapist, clinical supervisor, academic, author, advocate, trainer, policy writer, and more often than she cares to reflect on, a general thorn in the side of the system who would often prefer not to think about children abuse and trauma. She has also worked in government and non-government settings and in private practice with adult and child victims of abuse and trauma, including adults and adolescents who have perpetrated child sexual abuse and domestic violence. She is now retired and loves being a grandmother to her first grandchild and not being dictated to by an alarm clock 5 mornings a week. So Maggie, how does exposure to family violence impact a child's overall well-being and development?
Well, one thing we can say with absolute certainty that it is never positive. So in rare instances, it might possibly be verging towards benign, but really the most common scenario is that it is detrimental. It is, for some children, it is detrimental in a way which they will struggle all their lives with. The extent of detriment will depend a lot on the child's personality. If there's other safe people, adults that they can, sort of feel connected to. The younger the child, usually the more lasting the impact, because the mother-child bond, which is what's needed to create secure attachment, if that's sort of trampled over right from the beginning, that has lifelong consequences for relationships. And also, if the domestic terrorism involves actual violence, which it very often doesn't, but particularly if the child lives in reasonable fear that their mum will be seriously injured or killed, that has the impact is absolutely doubled, tripled, whatever. Yeah.
And so what are some of the common emotional and behavioral responses that a child might experience or may exhibit, because they are experiencing family violence?
Right. Well, it's very hard to spot. Because a child might react in a whole range of different ways. I suppose one thing that children who live with domestic terrorism learn is to manage their behavior in order, as they see it, to lessen the impact of the violence, the terror in the household. So they become really skilled and attuned to how to manage themselves with others, which might mean I'm never going to let anyone know. So they actually manage to be with people in a way where people would never know. Others are not like that to the same extent. It's so hard to say, but basically, unless a child tells you, or unless you hear from a mum about what's going on, you're not that likely to spot. I mean, I'm sorry, I should perhaps say that this is my very firm belief that a large percentage of kids who are diagnosed with ADHD, which is, oh, well, that's good, we'll just give them a pill, actually have a trauma history. And I think we do a huge disservice to those kids by thinking that their behavior is something biological rather than something emotional and psychological. Yeah.
Especially because a lot of people won't talk about what's going on at home because they
yeah.
So then in turn, how does it affect their relationships with peers, like their friends, their teachers, and any other sort of authority figures? Do you feel like they even fear people of authority as well?
Well, again, it's, can cross the spectrum. For many kids who live in terror at home, school is a safe place.
Yeah.
And I've worked with many kids who've been able to nominate or identify that if it wasn't for this or that teacher or this or that, sort of school friend or school friend's parents, they believe that they would not have come out of it as well as they have. So certainly school can be a safe place for kids. And for those kids who have the capacity to develop strong friendships with safe people, that's great. But many kids don't manage that. Particularly as they grow older, they might find themselves engaging with kids who are as traumatized as they are, even if neither kid speaks about it. So obviously that sets them on a trajectory, well, continues them on the trajectory that they might already have been on. Yeah. I'm sorry if I can't be more direct, but
No,
it is about, sort of every child's unique and
yeah.
every experience is unique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Mm.
it manif it manifests for them in a different sort of way, right? But
Yeah.
then obviously some of the potential long-term effects of exposure to family violence impact
Mm.
mental health and future relationships. And do you
Mm.
find that often children who grow up in homes with family violence are likely to end up in relationships where their partner is violent towards them, or do they end up being violent towards their partner?
The most common background for perpetrators of domestic violence
Mm.
have been growing up in houses full of terror.
Yeah.
Which does not mean that every every male child who grows up in a house where there's terror is not going to become a perpetrator, but the majority of perpetrators have grown up in that situation. And similarly for girls, they might find themselves unknowingly connecting to people who will then go on to perpetrate them in the way that they've grown skilled at connecting with the perpetrator at home to keep themselves safe, to manage the situation the best they can.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't choose, neither boys nor girls choose to go into those sorts of relationships. In fact, usually they'll say, I will never go into that sort of relationship, but they don't have the solid sense of secure attachment. In fact, mostly they're driven by fears of abandonment, and that does not help in any respectful, secure relationship. Yeah.
And they, I suppose, have an element of vulnerability both as a perpetrator and a victim.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, people don't get it. They think perpetrators, nasty bastards,
Mm.
and their behavior is exactly that. But almost always it's driven by fear of being abandoned because they feel small and weak inside and they need the woman to lean onto, and then they fear she's going to leave him.
Yeah.
Not enough time to go into all that, but
Oh,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more one
Mm.
day. Um, so in your role, how did you intervene to help children cope and heal after experiencing family violence?
Um, Usually, I mean, I could say, well, sort of I was mainly a play therapist,
Yeah.
certainly for children up to 12. I would always work with the mum in the room because it is about healing the relationship. Um, the relationship the child has with me is not nearly as significant as the relationship that they're going to have with the mum.
Yeah.
But you can only begin to do that work once the mum feels safe, the child feels safe, they feel supported by the system to be safe, and whilst the perpetrator is out of the picture, doing the work that they need to do.
Yeah.
And sadly, in most cases, all that sort of stuff does not happen, and children cannot heal while there's ongoing trauma. They can't. Hmm.
Especially when they say hypothetically they separate. And the child still is required to have that relationship with the father. So there's still,
Yes,
it makes it harder to heal in that sense, doesn't
absolutely. I mean, I
it?
can't believe our family court is so stupid that they say that, well, children need a relationship with their father. Well, actually, yes, they do, but they need a respectful relationship with their father. And they're not going to get that until such time as the father's done the work. But if the father knows he can continue to see the child without doing any work, well, then we're not helpful to anyone. Yes.
Mm.
Yes. And I've worked with many kids who feel their role is to placate dad, to make him feel okay, so that he's not lonely. But that's not the role of the child. The role of the child is to be the child.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they not need to put their need, like the other parents' needs ahead of theirs.
exactly, exactly.
So how would you have, like, how did you collaborate with legal professionals like barristers, court staff, judges to address the different needs of children affected by family violence?
Right. Well, for 5 years, we tried to run training for judges with domestic terrorism.
Hmm.
And I think we got one judge in all that time, because who knows? So my work was often in, well, almost always legal stuff was around the family court, which was like a cesspit, like an overwhelmingly detrimental and horrific experience for everybody, um, because mostly because perpetrators learn quite quickly how to use the system to terrorize. If they're somewhat removed, they've been somewhat removed from the family system, they learn how to use the legal system to terrorize the family. And that's just not okay. We need to get 1,000 times better. I have a friend who's still working there, and she says, but Maggie, it's better than it was. And I said, well, that came from a very low base, didn't it? And she said, yes. Yeah.
Is secondary abuse, isn't it? Ongoing litigation,
Yes.
form of
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
It is
Mm.
a really heartbreaking process, I think.
Yes. In fact, I always used to say to my clients, don't think the family court or the criminal court will help you. In fact, really do everything you can outside the legal system.
Yeah.
But most often they were trapped into the legal system by the perpetrator. Yeah.
Often mediation isn't an appropriate step for a situation like that, is it?
Well, as far as I'm aware, the guidelines say that mediation shouldn't be engaged in when there's domestic terrorism. But I know many clients who've been forced into that, partly because they've been advised not to mention domestic terrorism. Um, yeah, I mean, it's not you can't be safe. So you're continuing to manage your behaviors and your responses according to what you judge is going to make you as safe as you can be. So it's abusive. It's abusive to be, to be dragged into mediation. Yeah.
So what are some important considerations? What are some important considerations you take into working with families who do have a history of violence and abuse?
Safety, level of fear, level of accepting responsibility, like all the practical stuff of, sort of, if I leave him, how will I survive? All that sort of advocacy stuff. Some of the domestic violence services are great at what they do, but their resources are always limited. So it is always about, if all our systems could engage well together, if the cops would always share information, then not too bad. If child protection would share information, they're appalling. Yeah, so if we could collaborate with having the child and their would-be protective parent at the center, and actually ensuring that the perpetrator's on the outer and he's getting support, then, you know, we'd be 95% of the way there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess sometimes there is that fear also of coming out and speaking to people about domestic violence because people aren't going to take it seriously. So there's not much you can help them when they have that fear as well of talking about what's going on.
Yes, I mean, when I was, my last role was in the statewide protection of children unit in WA Health, and we supported hospitals developing up questionnaires for pregnant women around domestic terrorism, because we know that's that's one of the key risk points in life. And so we did lots of training with nurses, community nurses or whatever, about how to ask the questions which will hopefully enable the mother or the mother to be to respond truthfully. And look, the reality is that even if you're really skilled, and even if you ask the right sort of questions in the right sort of way, they might still not feel safe enough to say something to you. I know someone who was horrifically physically abused, and she was in hospital with the burns from one of the abuse episodes, and a social worker in prison closed the curtains so that the father could not be looking in the window. He'd already got him out of the room. And he said, I know something's happened to you. If you can tell me, I promise you that we will do things, you know, for you. And she did manage to tell him after she was clear that her children would be safe.
Yeah.
So we can do those things, but you know, she'd lived like that for 8 years and hadn't told anybody. Yeah.
And then there's
Mm.
quite a lot. Do you like not sure what your experience is with Indigenous communities as well, but there's quite a lot of domestic violence in Indigenous communities as well, isn't there?
That would probably be the understatement. Yes, there's there's the most enormous amount. And and the level of actual physical violence that's perpetrated in amongst this domestic terrorism can be extreme. So women will live women and their children can live in abject fear. But that's also coupled with the fear that what might happen to their violent partner if if they go to jail. So I mean, I think it's fair to say that the large majority of Aboriginal communities don't feel that they have any system they can trust. Certainly Aboriginal women do not report domestic violence to child protection because they are rightfully fearful that their children will be removed from them. Yeah.
Probably feel safer with their abuser as well than they would feel with the white population, right?
Maybe, yes.
Yeah.
It's an intractable, enormous problem. I don't have I don't even have an iota of how we can even begin to address it. Taking alcohol out of all communities, reinstating the cashless welfare card, which is what Aboriginal women say, practical stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Trauma begats trauma. Yeah,
Intergenerational drama in our
exactly.
it's just
Hmm.
deep, isn't it?
Yes.
Um, how can social workers advocate for policy changes and community resources to hopefully prevent and address family violence and support children and families that are in need?
Well, there's some great policies. I've even written a few myself. There's some great policies, but people are not aware of them, don't follow them, are not supported by agencies to attend to them. I don't think we need any more policies. I truly, truly don't. I think we need people who are committed to knowing the level of harm that children can suffer. I mean, still, there's some belief that if children don't actually witness violence, then they're okay. But of course, that's not true. Children who live with domestic terrorism are traumatized through that terrorism, whether they see it, whether they hear it, whether it's directed at them or to others. So if we can just, for one thing, understand the enormity of that for the child, well, surely that would propel us to do better. I think also we need to take a position of believing the mother. She will almost always underestimate the level of fear she lives with, the level of trauma and violence perpetrated towards her. And then if we can actually believe it when she says that this man, even though he's now sitting in a suit and tie in front of you and he works in a bank, he is not safe. This is what you're seeing as the figure he presents to the outside world. There is another side of him. If we believed that, if we believed women, then we go a long way. Yes.
You're right, because quite often when I read articles and when I hear news presentations about women or men who have been killed in a domestic violence episode, it's they were such a good person, such an outstanding member of the community, which then sort of downplays it a little bit, doesn't it?
Exactly, because I mean, certainly I know many women whose partners were cops. So how can she tell someone that they're in a small country town and this cop, who everyone thinks is a hero, actually locks all the doors at night, rapes her, sort of every second night, controls every single penny she spends? Well, people wouldn't believe her. But why would she make it up? Yeah, why would she make it up? Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to add? Any final words? Anything that you feel a message that we should get out there?
About 30 years ago, somebody asked me to run some training on the impact of children on domestic violence. And I thought, I don't really know. And I vividly remember going on the internet. The internet had not been going that long, and I found 10 articles. I remember that. Now there's millions of articles. So we absolutely know without a shadow of a doubt, yet we choose not to do anything. Or we choose not to do the right thing as often as we should. So what we are choosing is that the cycle of terrorism will continue. Children deserve better. Children deserve whole systems and communities to come together to support the mother-child secure attachment and to help that child develop a strong sense of self. Because really, I often say, if we did all that right, we could close down 95% of prisons, 95% of drug and alcohol services, 95% of mental health wards. Yeah.
I do, you're right. Children deserve to feel safe and feel secure.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
When they don't have all that, then it's the compounding effect.
Yes. Actually, one other thing I should say is that there's lots of great books. I've even written a couple myself for kids, for mums or others to read with kids about domestic terrorism in kids' appropriate language, so that the child, if it resonates with them, that they can continue to carry on the conversation. We have lots and lots of resources now, but we don't have many workers, and we certainly have very, very, very few funded services. Yeah. particularly from working with mums and their kids. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm.
Thank you so much for your time, Maggie.
That's okay. That's fine.
I'd love
Okay.
to have the link to your books because you're great. Thank you.
Okay, and good luck. Good luck with your study.
Thank you.
Okay.